Right, so let's do the elephant in the room for just a moment, because I saw you this week on Piers Morgan. He asked you repeatedly about Candace. You repeatedly basically said
I won't talk
you
about
don't
that.
want to talk
I'll say
about
that
it
here too.
Yeah, and that's fine. And can you at least talk to just sort of where it's at now? She's not with you. She's free.
She's free to do whatever she wants to do, to be wherever she wants to be. And the difference between a publisher like the Daily Wire and a platform like Locals is obviously that a platform should have a very broad range of speech that it allows, including speech that maybe even the creators don't believe is inside what they would consider to be the Overton window. It's a very different thing than direct subsidization of particular opinions. That means that there is no moral obligation for the Daily, and there's no free speech problem with the Daily Wire saying we don't wish to pay a particular host, or that host saying I don't wish to work here anymore, because again, there's a parting of the ways that is not really open for discussion at this point.
So conservative strength is often in their unity, in that no matter their ideological differences, they will often rally around a candidate or a figure just for power, because conservatism at the end of the day is all about preserving the status quo and serving capitalism. So if you care about that stuff and you want to make money off that stuff, like a lot of conservative media influencers want to do, then yes, you will rally around Donald Trump even if you hate him, because what else are you going to do? If you don't go along with everyone else, then you're going to be ostracized, because there is no room for critical thinking or divergence of thoughts within the American conservative movement. Now, probably one of the biggest examples of a conservative media organization trying to walk this tightrope is the Daily Wire. Now, of course, they recently, it seems, probably fired Candace Owens from working there, even though they haven't confirmed that they did that. Ben Shapiro saying, like, I don't have, the authority to fire people, whatever. It's pretty clear to me that she's been fired for anti-Semitism. Now, Candace Owens is actually an anti-Semite. I think that's pretty clear based on a history of her comments. But this is the problem. Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring and the people who run the Daily Wire, they don't actually care about anti-Semitism. Ben Shapiro's the guy who said Kanye West isn't as bad as Rashida Tlaib, by the way, so let's not pretend this company cares at all. It's pretty clear it's because Candace Owens has criticised Israel. And although she does that for anti-Semitic reasons, it's pretty clear that anti-Semitism pretty much has nothing to do with it. It's just because she criticised Israel. The Daily Wire are very, very pro-Israel. So in my opinion, that's basically why she was let go. American conservatism is basically all far right. It's just different strands. You have like the Western chauvinist far right of, Ben Shapiro, who's like this neoconservative type, thinks about like Western supremacy, Western values based on like Judeo-Christian tradition. That's what a lot of the more typical conservatives think. So you get them supporting Israel and everything Israel does. But then you have the more Trumpist faction, the far-right isolationist faction, who they don't want foreign wars, they don't want foreign aid to any country, not Ukraine, and especially not Israel, because they believe Israel has been controlling American foreign policy basically forever, because it's just an extension of a Jewish conspiracy to run the world, basically. Like, that's what this section believes. So when they oppose Israel, they don't oppose Israel because Israel are doing terrible things. Because do you honestly think far-right fascists actually care about Muslim lives? These are the same people who ally with all the far-right in Europe who are constantly demonizing Muslims. No, they just don't like supporting anything to do with Judaism and Jewish people. And they're basically using what's happening now to become more mainstream. And it's working. And I made a whole video about these far-right grifters using Israel to get attention. And yeah, it's working. A lot of them have massively boosted their social media followings, have been shared around the political spectrum, not just on the far right. Loads of, left-wing people, weird anti-Western contrarians sharing this stuff. And Candace Owens has kind of slotted in among them as someone on the far right who is criticising Israel. And of course, this poses a question for the future of conservatism in, I guess, the online space is, what faction are you going to join? Are you going to join the more traditional neocon faction at the Daily Wire? Or are you going to join the traditional fascist right wing of the far right with Nick Fuentes and all those other people who, yes, might oppose what Israel's doing, but they're only using that to get into power and to get more popularity? But I just want to talk about how this has been brewing for a long, long time, and how this even goes back to the Steven Crowder thing, I think, early last year, and how this conservative civil war has just reached such a toxic level. But these people only have themselves to blame. Ben Shapiro especially. You can't fire people for perceived anti-Semitism when you allow anti-Semitism to run rampant on your platform, and you allow people who constantly push anti-Semitism to keep their jobs as long as they don't oppose Israel. It's a backlash that you've created. You've allowed this environment to flourish. You've created this environment in many ways. And now when it's coming back on you in your own interest in terms of support for Israel, now you're firing people and pretending that's not an infringement on free speech. And this is funny because Ben Shapiro said Gina Carano was cancelled by Disney, but Candace Owens is not being cancelled by the Daily Wire. It seems to be like quite a similar situation. So we're going to get into all of this a bit more in a sec. Also, before we go any further, another YouTuber called Reeducation asked me to shout out some mutual aid today. So the Cathedral Community Fridge is a mutual aid organisation out of the Canadian prairies that uses decentralised and democratic organising to end food insecurity instantly. As poverty becomes more extreme, so does the work to lessen suffering to those living in it. So please consider donating, sharing, or engaging to help the Cathedral Community Fridge to continue working towards liberation. And they have a GoFundMe page, and they also have a Patreon page. They have basically every kind of way you want to donate. At the moment, they're in need of funds for maintenance. They need a new door, among other things. So yeah, please consider helping out. And I'll put the links to everything down in the description. So to frame this conservative civil war and talk about how it got to this level, let's just talk about the history a bit. So I want to talk about first the Steven Crowder stuff from last year. So Steven Crowder was offered like a $50 million contract to work at the Daily Wire, and he basically used that as a hill to die on to basically say, the Daily Wire are big con. It's a big conservative media organisation which won't accept people who say stuff out of a certain like train of thought. And he was saying that basically they were doing the work of big tech as well by censoring people at the Daily Wire and exploiting like lower rung creators like Brett Cooper and basically just using them. So what happened there is you had a lot of backlash against Ben Shapiro. You would say maybe Steven Crowder is more right wing than Ben Shapiro, and basically a lot of people turning against the Daily Wire. Now, this also played in nicely because the Daily Wire were very massive on Ron DeSantis, and Ben Shapiro had him on the Daily Wire show. Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro have been, I guess, fairly vocal in their support of Ron DeSantis against Donald Trump because they always didn't like Donald Trump because they feel like he doesn't serve in the best interests of the conservative agenda because he's, so incompetent, but also I think personally they just don't like him because they think he's an idiot, right? So Ben Shapiro was always against Donald Trump, but quickly changed when he got the nomination because that's what you got to do. You have to jump on and support Donald Trump, and all of these people will be saying nice things about Donald Trump this year as well. At some point, they're holding back a tiny bit, acting like it's just, out of hatred for Joe Biden, but they will start endorsing Donald Trump more vocally as the election comes up. Now, in that, you had loads of people, the America Firsters, turn against the Daily Wire even further, people saying they're controlled opposition for the conservative movement. People say they're no better than liberals and leftists for supporting Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. So you had all of that brewing in the background, how Donald Trump supporters never really like Ben Shapiro because they feel like he's fake and insincere in his support of the Trump administration and conservatism. Now, another part of this as well is America Firsters were also massive anti-vaxxers, and because Ben Shapiro promoted the vaccine, they also used that against him as well. So they hate him for a multitude of reasons, but also something they've always hated him for is because he supports Israel. And like I said, to the America First crowd, which is really bizarre considering how pro-Israel Trump is. They even named a settlement after him in Syria called like Trump Heights and stuff. And also Jared Kushner and all his dealings recently, what he said about Gaza. But yeah, they are mad at Ben Shapiro for the Israel support. And obviously on social media, on Twitter especially, there's been a massive backlash against Israel across all social media for what they are doing. But Ben Shapiro has remained pretty steadfast in his support for them. Now, if Ben Shapiro fired Candace Owens for anti-Semitism at any time of her working at the Daily Wire, I would say that's totally fair enough. Because they've only recently done it, not after she supported Kanye West saying all those terrible things, not after being friends of Kanye West for years, after all this controversy, no, they only fired her recently. That tells you everything you need to know about this. And on that, we're talking about the history. The Daily Wire has constantly employed people who are actual anti-Semites, in my opinion. And as you're going to see, they're going to use Matt Walsh as a voice at the Daily Wire who doesn't agree with Ben Shapiro, but they keep him on. Matt Walsh, I think, is probably anti-Semitic because he is just a fascist, right? So I believe he is, and he's not a vocal supporter of Israel anyway. I just think Matt Walsh, like some of the others, know where his bread is buttered and basically probably thinks he's nothing without the Daily Wire. So if you start going against Israel on the Daily Wire, then yes, you're probably not going to have a job, as Candace Owens found out. Now, Michael Knowles apparently is Candace Owens' child's godfather, right? So they're apparently pretty buddy-buddy. Now, again, Michael Knowles has expressed support for Francisco Franco, the old fascist dictator of Spain.
The difference here is Mussolini was a pretty bad guy. He wasn't the worst guy in the world. He wasn't Stalin. He wasn't Lenin. But Mussolini was, let's say, at least a mixed bag, leaning on the side of bad. He was a bad political leader. Franco was, broadly speaking, pretty good.
The guy who allied with the Germans in the Spanish Civil War, like literal German armed forces fought on his side in the Spanish Civil War. A guy who personally handed over to the Germans a list of all Spanish Jews. Franco, of course, was anti-Semitic in his anti-communism as well, but apparently at the Daily Wire, that's fine. No problem supporting fascist dictators from the 1930s at the Daily Wire. No comment from Ben Shapiro. That's absolutely fine. Expressing support for fascist anti-Semites is fine because you didn't criticize Israel. Now, another point of that as well is Jordan Peterson is obviously a massive anti-Semite as well in his promotion of the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, but also his bizarre revisionism about fascist Germany in this period. I made a whole video about it, and so many people, including Israelis, have called him out for his dangerous comments about this period, which seems to rehabilitate a lot of fascist Germany, right? He has a very nice job at the Daily Wire as well. His contract is probably one of the most lucrative there, right? Them two are fine. They're fine because why? They support Israel. Jordan Peterson is a big Israel supporter. They will support Israel. And this is a common thing you see across conservative movements and even with far-right movements now across Europe as well. They support Israel because why? They hate Muslims at the moment more than they hate Jewish people. So Israel doing what it's doing to the Palestinians, who are mainly Muslim, that is actually a good thing. The far right across Europe, even people like Tommy Robinson, they support Israel because it's a vision of what they want their own countries to be in response to the refugee crisis that's been ongoing since like 2014, right? But if you support Israel, you're not an anti-Semite, no matter how much anti-Semitism you spew. But if you're someone like me, who actually calls out real anti-Semitism all the time, but I'm also against Israel, then to all these people, including Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring, they would 100% call me an anti-Semite, but not people on their own network who either support previous fascist dictators who are anti-Semitic or actually push anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right? Because at the end of the day, Ben Shapiro has never cared about this stuff. Now let's get on to his recent comments because it's all just him trying to hide behind he did fire Candace Owens for going against Israel. So he sat down with Dave Rubin and they spoke about it, and he basically used the example of Matt Walsh to say, actually, we do tolerate a whole host of opinions at the Daily Wire, and he gives no answer if she was fired or not, but, you know, I think she was.
Open for discussion at this point.
Does it surprise you that so many people, even on our side of this, are confused about that as it relates to free speech and quote unquote cancel culture? Like severing a business tie, as long as you're not throwing someone in jail, they're able to be everywhere else, is not.
I'm not super surprised at the controversy, honestly, because to a certain extent, I think that there's been a reaction on the right to the excesses of the left. So because what the left did is they said that the Overton window ought to be closed so tight that no one can get inside the Overton window. Basically, if you're to the right of Hillary Clinton, you can't be allowed inside the Overton window.
World,
yes, exactly. and not just with regard to platforms, but with regard to publishers. So, for example, this week, NBC News deciding that Ronna McDaniel was too much for them. Ronna McDaniel can't work at NBC News. The sacred halls of NBC News must not be sullied by the former head of the RNC. Jen Psaki, however, can have a show on MSNBC despite being the press secretary for the White House 5 seconds ago. Right? The right's response to that is, I think, correct to say you guys have shut the Overton window too tight. But I think some elements of the right have basically said there is no Overton window. The Overton window should be completely exploded with regard not just to platforms, with which I kind of agree, but with regard to publishers. So NBC News not only has an obligation to hire Ronna McDaniel, NBC News has the obligation to hire Alex Jones, for example.
Right,
I
which
don't think
just
that's
makes
true.
no sense at a business level beyond free speech. I mean, there's a reason that networks exist.
Right, they have
comprises
they have
a series,
editorial
yeah.
positions.
Yeah.
Daily Wire has a very strong editorial position on a wide variety of issues. And by the way, I should say that there are a lot of people who are suggesting this is about disagreements over Israel. I mean, I can safely say it is not about disagreements over Israel, to the extent that, without reference to Candace at all here, Matt Walsh has taken the position that America ought not be involved in the Middle East at all. Matt Walsh's position, so far as I understand it, and I've talked to him about it, is that Israel, in a conflict between Israel and Hamas, Israel is obviously a more moral party than, but also it's very far away. He doesn't care and it doesn't involve America. That's just a pure isolationist position. I disagree with it. I think it's wrong. I think that it's short-sighted. But again, he's on our platform. That is well within the range of acceptable discourse at the Daily Wire. So the notion that you have to mirror my exact perspectives on what Israel is doing in Gaza is obviously not true, based on the roster of hosts that we currently have. There are a lot of other factors, obviously.
I love how even in this, he somehow tries to blame the left for like shifting the Overton window. Yeah, Ben Shapiro, it makes sense that a company is going to have a certain image, but him pretending you're allowed a diversity of opinion on Israel at the Daily Wire is so funny, because Matt Walsh is an isolationist who doesn't support foreign aid to any country, including Israel, right? But has Matt Walsh actually criticised Israel at all? No. If he did that, he would be out of a job. So he doesn't do it. So even if he doesn't support this, he doesn't go on his show saying, what I think Israel is doing is very bad and we shouldn't be funding that, right? He doesn't say that. He might just say, no foreign aid to Ukraine or Israel. I'm against it all. Let's spend it here in America, which is funny because conservatives don't want anything to get better. So what would they be spending the money on? Universal healthcare or something? No, it's just, pure bullshit that these political grifters always say just to try and justify their stupid positions. But it's pretty clear to me, anti-Semitism is tolerated at the Daily Wire. Ben Shapiro has constantly downplayed it, downplayed Elon Musk's, downplayed all those Gina Carano posts, downplayed what Candace Owens has said in the past, downplayed what Kanye West has said. But now people are massively turning on the Daily Wire because, yes, you've created a very, very far-right audience with your content, and on pretty much every single issue, you are aligned with the America First group, apart from a couple things to do with international relations, right? Like, the main thing that makes you different is supporting Israel or not, but on 99% of things, you're pretty aligned, right? But they hate you because of this, and they also, Ben Shapiro, they're never going to like you, which you probably realize, because you're a Jewish person. And on that as well, this is how desperate the Daily Wire are. So when they were having that drama with Stephen Crowder, Jeremy Boring put out like these videos talking about how like great Stephen Crowder was and like he's very talented and stuff, trying to like diffuse the situation because they know if they go on like the offensive against Stephen Crowder, they're going to lose out on their audience. So there was a Twitter space with Nick Fuentes and Jeremy Boring jumps on, and although he is trying to push back on some of the stuff he's saying, listen to his tone, because he doesn't want to come out and say, oh my God, I am getting rid of people like Nick Fuentes at my network or people who I perceive to be anti-Semitic for going against Israel, but I'm not really going to stand my ground. So this is how I'm going to talk to someone like Nick Fuentes, because I know there is probably a crossover between people who watch him and watch us.
I get where you're coming from, but my strong position is just that we got to put America first. America's got to be a Christian country. And as long as guys like Shapiro cannot say Christ is king and they refuse to say America first, I think it's notable. Ben Shapiro has never uttered those words. I don't think they should have leadership in America. So, I mean, people can say, well, I don't like what you say about this and that. I don't like that guys like Shapiro will not say Christ is king, America first. I think they forfeit their ability to lead. I would never listen to somebody that can't say those things, because, I mean, those things are really the foundation of wisdom, which is the love of God, which, as you say, goes through the Son, as we all know, can only go through Jesus, and oikophilia, which is, your love of your home, your love of your homeland that you reside in, not some other homeland. So I just want to get that across to you. It's kind of a strange circumstance that we're talking, but that's how I feel about it.
And I'll say this, Nick, that I listen to your show quite often. I think you're one of the most talented people out there, and I'm very concerned about some of the things that you're saying. I wish, I think that you're a very gifted communicator, and so it's hard for me to imagine that you consistently miscommunicate. Build the floor back to all the people who actually came on here to talk to each other.
So Ben Shapiro obviously has a good friend in Jeremy Boring, someone who is completely unwilling to stand up when people are saying like actual fascist rhetoric to him about people who work at his network who are Jewish people, saying like Ben Shapiro should say Christ is king. Like, Ben Shapiro is Jewish. Why should he say that, right? And the next guy, I don't know who the next guy was, saying that, like, you know, the Jews are ruining free speech in America.
As a Christian and as an American, I see free speech in America completely under attack. The Jewish lobby has a tremendous amount of power to do this. Also anti-American. And for a conservative company, to me, it's like, okay, you guys are making a lot of noise about this quote unquote anti-Semitism, but you guys aren't really making much noise about the fact that free speech in America is completely under assault by Jewish people. And I'm kind of wondering, like, why?
Well, one thing I would say is that no one, to my knowledge, at the Daily Wire is a citizen of any country other than America. Matt Walsh today, who opposes essentially all foreign aid, including to Israel. I think that it's difficult to make an argument that we aren't for our country, or that we're not pro our country, or that...
No challenge on that at all. No challenge. And again, the framing by the fascists is it's the Jews doing it. And obviously they love this framing, and that's why Zionism is so dangerous, because if people like Ben Shapiro are saying, if you don't support Israel, you're not a real Jew, and you tie up the Jewish identity in supporting Israel, and you start conflating those together, it becomes easier for this type of rhetoric to go mainstream about the Jews. Not that there are millions of Jewish people who don't agree with what Israel is doing right now, and there's hundreds of thousands who actually do not agree with the state of Israel even existing. But because people like Ben Shapiro are happy to conflate these things all the time, to attack anti-Zionist Jews, people can go around in conservative circles who are against Israel saying, oh, it's the Jews attacking free speech. When in places like Germany, Jews are being disproportionately arrested for being pro-Palestinian through their activism and like pro-Palestinian marches, right? But again, that's why I hate fascists like Ben Shapiro using this stuff against everyone, because it allows this stuff to flourish. And that's why I said to everyone in that other video, some people saying, well, what's the problem with like retweeting Candace Owens saying something bad about Israel? This is the problem, because this is the discourse they want. They want people to start saying the Jews are suppressing free speech in America because no one is allowed to criticize Israel, completely omitting the fact that people like Donald Trump and the evangelical Christians who support him are absolutely fanatical Israel supporters based on biblical prophecy, and you want them in the White House again, right? Now, obviously, conservative ideology is full of hypocrisy. It doesn't make sense. Like, these guys, like I said, all supporting Trump, even though he's pro-Israel, but using Ben Shapiro's pro-Israeli support to use against him and stuff. But at the end of the day, Ben Shapiro likes to talk about the Overton window at the Daily Wire. They've been shifting the Overton window themselves for a long, long time through their fascist content they've constantly put out. And this includes anti-Semitic content they've put out. They just haven't been criticizing Israel. So they cannot be shocked, which they probably would be, at the level of anti-Semitism in their audience and the conservative movement as a whole. Now, there's one more thing I want to prove my point in this. And Seth Dillon obviously runs the Babylon Bee, which is very cozy with like Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, a lot of these people, right? And a lot of its satire is often just like promoting conservative figures. It's pretty terrible. But I was watching a video from Mike at the Humanist Report, and you guys should go watch this. I'll link it in the description. And it's basically the Babylon Bee made a joke about white fascists, thinking they're like the master race, and then were surprised that most of their audience thought the joke was actually racist against white people and really didn't like it, because in 2017, when they originally ran something like this, no one found it controversial. And maybe you got to ask yourselves, what have you done and the rest of the conservative movement have done with your pal Elon Musk to shift it so much that most conservatives are openly anti-Semitic now?
But without further ado, this is the satirical piece in question that ruffled so many of their fans' feathers. Quote, "The white race must maintain our genetic purity," says inbred man. Here's how their fans reacted when they decided to share that on Twitter. Were you guys hacked by Jimmy Kimmel? Unfollow. Zero white guilt. It's good to be white. What were you hoping to accomplish with this one? Wow, who thought this was a good idea? This person tagged the manager of Twitter. Now, Matt14 shared some more screenshots with one person calling them anti-white, another saying, "We get it, you're all Jews," and one person questioning if they've gone woke. Now, another user shared screenshots accusing them of taking Jewish marching orders, saying the site is run by Jewish people, and another called it Jewish projection. And the owner of the Babylon Bee, Seth Dillon, actually addressed his disappointed fans, writing on Twitter, "When you're personally offended by a joke about white supremacy, you might want to rethink some things, including whether Christ really is your king." Now, I'm assuming that he added the Christ is king part because he's likely recently been seeing a lot of replies like these, where people use Christ as king to be anti-Semitic towards him since he is Jewish. And these are just 2 examples that he shared. In fact, the very first reply that I saw was someone saying to him, "You're Jewish, right?"
So yeah, go watch the rest of Mike's video. But yeah, conservatives being anti-Semitic, it's literally like baked into the ideology. And people like Ben Shapiro, Orthodox conservative Jews, allying themselves with these conservatives just to support Israel is now massively backfiring, because this is most of your audience now. Most of your audience aren't like old school Republicans from the 70s or something. It's not that world anymore. Most of them are people who don't like Jewish people. And they only tolerate minorities when they say something that you like. So Ben Shapiro, they tolerated you for a long time because you constantly push stuff they liked. Candace Owens, they're tolerating right now because she says everything they want her to say, and also gives them some plausible deniability about, you know, oh, we don't actually hate black people. Look, here's one black person who lines up with our way of thinking and says everything we say about black people. So therefore, you know, we're not actually racist against black people. But make no mistake, they will happily turn on her as well when they think she isn't useful anymore. That's why it's so pathetic to see Jeremy Boren not even defend people like Ben Shapiro from the actual alt-right, because they're so terrified of losing their audience. Because at the end of the day, I guess they feel like no matter how much hatred they whip up in online spaces, it doesn't really affect them. Like, they'll always have the financial means to leave America if they want. They can always go somewhere else. They can always just pack up. They've made their bag off this content, they can go. And anyway, this conservative civil war is probably going to keep popping up. You had it over the vaccines. Now you have it over Israel. You had it kind of with Ukraine as well. But we'll see what happens with like this election, which is going to be fun, I guess. So that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.